Minister, you first became a minister in the Fine Gael Labour government in 2011. A government that, by the way, in its programme said it was going to eradicate homelessness in 5 years. That government made a decision in June of that year to discontinue capital investment in social housing and to rely instead on the outsourcing of social housing to the private sector. Since then, from 2011, average rents have gone from €740 to €1,500 nationally. In Dublin, they're now €2,082. And in Dunleary, my area, South Dublin, the highest anywhere in the country, €2,280. The policy of outsourcing is, as has been discussed in the media today, although actually I got these answers in July of this year, is by the end of this year going to cost €1.8 billion in HAPs, RAS and leasing arrangements going to the private sector, in most cases to pay for properties that NAMA sold as another government decision made by that government, in most cases, which is in itself fairly extraordinary. One target you met as the Housing Minister in Rebuilding Ireland was the target to get to 80,000 RAS, HAPs and leasing properties, which is now costing us, has cost us in that period €1.8 billion. We now have, just to get another bit of information out there, 61,312 HAPs tenancies, 17,507 RAS tenancies and 952 leasing. And another 10 to 15,000 projected for the course of 2022, far exceeding, by the way, the amount of local authority housing or public housing that will be built in that period. Now, as if all that isn't bad enough, landing us with the housing crisis we are now in, during that same period, including a period you were Minister for Housing, the HAP limits from 2017 in this dysfunctional, incredibly expensive system have not gone up since 2017, when rents continue to go up. Which means in areas of Dublin where average rents, or my area, you are by definition homeless if you need accommodation, if you're relying on HAPs limits, because the maximum HAP, even if you're homeless, is 1,950 and the average HAP is 1,300. In the same period, since you entered government, 2011, the income thresholds for eligibility for social housing have not changed. And by the way, if you're knocked off, as many are, from the housing list, because you exceed the income threshold, you're not entitled to HAPs either, meaning you are by definition homeless. Now, do you accept this was a disastrous failure, and what is your government going to do to compensate those who have suffered as a result in terms of delivering them affordable and secure housing?
Minister, please.
Deputy, you and I have had this debate many times in this House, and you're right on one thing. Relying on rental supports, or overly relying on rental supports, is not a long to medium-term solution for the housing challenges that we face. Supply is the solution. More social housing, more affordable housing, more targeted and tailor-made solutions for people who need housing, who want to own their own homes and pay for them, but need the support of the state to do that, and also people who want to be in the rental market and need supports to be there. The truth is that there has been an over-reliance on HAP in recent years, because we simply haven't been able to deliver enough new builds at the pace that's needed, and that is a simple and practical problem. We are now committing to spend €4 billion on housing each year, but it does take time to build significant numbers of housing. We're going to be providing in and around 10,000 housing units per year in terms of social housing, as well as affordable housing on top of that, which in time will have a huge impact in terms of responding to housing need. But you can't, on the one hand, say that we shouldn't be continuing to spend more and more and more money on HAP, and then at the same time make the case for increasing thresholds and increasing the amounts of money that tenants can get. Like, that's a contradiction, Deputy. HAP is an emergency response in many ways for many people, while the state builds a housing stock that responds to the extraordinary demands that we're seeing at the moment. And that is what we are going to do in the next number of years. Next year, in 2022, there'll be 11,800 social homes delivered, including 9,000 new builds in terms of social housing. This year, in 2021, there will be 12,750 new social homes, including 9,500 new builds, 800 targeted acquisitions and 2,450 homes through leasing programmes. So I can remember clearly when I came into the Department of Housing, and I remember Minister Kelly was there before me, and we were effectively faced with trying to reignite a building sector to build huge quantities of housing stock from a completely flat start. I think, and I'm sure I stand corrected, but the year before I became Housing Minister, all of the local authorities combined built, I think, 75 social houses the year before. Now that figure is 7,000 or 8,000. Deputy, this is something that will take time to fix, and in the meantime we need to support people in rental accommodation through HAP and other solutions which are there.
Thank you, Minister.
It wasn't an accident, it wasn't an emergency, it was a policy. Let's just be honest about it. It was a policy. The reason so many few houses were built in the year you referred to is because there was a policy decision made in 2011 to discontinue them. Meanwhile, we were selling properties, which we're now renting back at very extraordinary cost. The target for HAPS, RAS and leasing, again, wasn't an accident. It was a policy. It's in Rebuilding Ireland. It was your policy. That the amount of HAPS, RAS and leasing would do was 2.5 times what we were going to deliver in terms of actual local authority housing. And is it a contradiction to say, I want the thresholds raised? No, it's not. I'm sorry. You've created the mess. But the consequence of that mess is, I'm afraid, while you ramp up, and you've got to do it at far greater speed than you were doing, you cannot have a situation where people who are 10 years on a housing list get made homeless because their average income briefly, for example, goes over the threshold. Huge numbers of people have lost out. They can't afford the rents, but then they are thrown off a housing list, or the HAPS list, HAP levels are not enough in the capital and many other areas now for people to get property. So they're by definition homeless. So I'm afraid you're going to have to do something about that. I mean, this week, I'll just finish on this.
Thank you, Deputy.
This week, I had a family who are solely dependent on social welfare in homeless accommodation for 3 years, taken off the housing list because they exceeded the limits.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, please.
The limits issue, I know that Minister Bryan is looking at the limits issue, and there are parts, particularly of the capital, where rental prices are significantly higher than HAP can support. I recognise that, and it's an issue that is being looked at. But just to correct the record, it was not policy, either for me or my predecessor, not to build large numbers of social housing homes. It was the opposite, in fact. And it was about ramping up as quickly as we possibly could and spending billions of euros of taxpayers' money to do that. And that has taken years to deliver. And it continues to. And now we're spending 4 billion as opposed to 2 billion then. But I think it's important that we don't start rewriting history here in terms of what happened pre-2011, in terms of where this country was and what it could afford to do. So the issues that you raise in relation to thresholds and ceilings, I think there is some validity to that. But the truth here is that these support programmes for leasing and rental are necessary while we dramatically increase social and affordable housing stock, which we will do in the years ahead.